The video is live.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular board meeting of the July 8th, 2020. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize this meeting is taking place on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, and I know we're all thankful to be here, and with that, we will get underway. The first item is the approval of the agenda. Before we take a motion to approve the agenda, are there any additions? Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of any additions. I believe you had a deletion.
Yes, so under number 16, RES 1 Treaty Advisory Commission appointment, I'm going to actually ask to remove that from the agenda. There's a little bit of consultation that I'd like to do with the province around the appointment and the timing of the meetings. So if we can remove that item, I'd ask for approval of the agenda with RES 1 removed. Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed, motion carries. And so I'll go back to the top. Ms. Legault, I think we're on to adoption of minutes. That's the minutes of the regular board meeting of June 24th, 2020. And the recommendation is that the minutes be adopted. Moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just bringing up the public input period submissions. I have one submission with two comments from Mr. Bernhard Yearlink on item CR 1.1. about the groundwater quality survey of aquifers 197 and 198 to be included in the South Cowichan Liquid Waste Management Plan and the Regional Watershed Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program for implementation. And he writes, I'm not sure what is meant by implementation, but I would urge the CVRD to let citizens that obtain their water from these aquifers know that 2% and 38% of wells tested had lead and manganese levels respectively above the Health Canada guidelines. Both lead and manganese can negatively affect the development of brains of children. Perhaps the CVRD should facilitate the testing of these wells by the citizens. I also urge the CVRD to carry out surveys of the other aquifers within the regional district. It is known that there are wells in Mill Bay that have manganese above the Health Canada guidelines, and there is one well on Goldstream Heights Drive known to have lead more than 5 times above the Health Canada guidelines. There may well be problems with manganese and lead in the groundwater of other areas of the CVRD. He also writes in regard to CR 1.2 that the Cowichan Watershed Society, providing services as the Cowichan Watershed Board, be granted $50,000 under the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program to further strategic partnerships and initiatives in support of the DWWP objectives. He writes that the CVRD has allocated $60,000 in the DWWP function towards strategic partnerships. I would urge the CVRD to consider making Shawnigan Basin Society a strategic partner and provide some funding support. I point out that under the leadership of the Society's president, members of the Society have already partnered with the CVRD and Ministry of Environment testing the water of the Shawnigan Lake, as well as creeks supplying the lake. Members of the Society have also been have been very active in monitoring fill sites and impacts of such fill sites on the groundwater, as well as streams entering Shawnigan Lake. The mandate of the Society has been expanded to include the South Cowichan region, and we are also willing to collaborate with other groups throughout the CVRD. The Shawnigan Basin Society has been looking into applications for funding from external agencies. However, these programs require matching funds. Funding from the CVRD can readily be amplified manyfold through applications to other funding agencies. This is signed Bernhard Yearlink, Vice President of the Shawnigan Basin Society. And there are no further submissions for public input period.
Great, thank you, Ms. Legault, and thank you, Mr. Yearlink, for that input. I believe we have no delegations this evening. Under report of the chairperson, I was going to cede a moment of my time to Director Nicholson to give us an update on the climate action work that she was doing with the, sorry, I can't remember the name, Director Nicholson, so I'll hand it off to you and you can give us an update on that work. You're still, yeah. Go ahead, I think we got you now.
Okay, so I would like to update you on the work underway by the Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Climate Leadership Group. So um, it's really an initiative to look at how we can work together as a coastal region on climate change issues. And so we live on a large island, and that's in turn part of a coastal ecosystem, an area that's oriented to the water and ferries. So there's a lot of aspects of the climate disruption issue, like transportation, for example, that we can best probably address collectively. And so the purpose of the initiative is to develop a plan for addressing our common issues. And in doing so, we hope to be able to leverage support for smaller jurisdictions that really don't have the capacity to deal with many of these things on their own. And together, we hopefully will have more influence to change things that are beyond our purview. So when you are planning, it's always important to start by pulling together all the information. You can do an environmental scan, so to speak. So then you can tease out the challenges and opportunities and that you're going to be having to consider. So we are currently working on that step in this initiative. So as part of our team, we have some excellent UVic people who have undertaken 2 projects for us. One is a territorial analysis. So it's a super interesting compilation of all the stats about the region. It's in the final stages of revisions, so that should be available soon. And also we've done a survey which you participated in. All the different jurisdictions participated in. We had excellent response rate. And it's really talking about all the different experiences and planning that's underway related to climate change in local government. So thank you for participating in that. So both those reports will be available for you soon and will form the basis for discussions that we're having at a 1-day virtual conference, November 6th. So I'd like you to check your calendars and hold that date. The results of that conference are then going to form the basis for a plan that we hope will be completed by the spring. It will be completed by the spring, and that's an ambitious undertaking, but we have 3 remarkable chairs leading the charge: Mayors Josie Osborne, Lisa Helps, and Michelle Staples. And we have actually a really great engaged team of representatives from across the area. So meanwhile, in our day-to-day, we continue here in the Cowichan Valley. I feel very subsumed by the Corona-19 environment and how to adapt to living differently. And I was thinking that it's sort of instructive when you think about the climate change issue, because it's instructive how public health officials have really focused on planning based on a 2-week lag from exposure to symptoms of infection. So it's really challenging to plan for things that are coming up, but you don't really know what they're going to be. And that's really the situation we're in with climate change. So we haven't been able to plan based on that. We're talking about a couple of decades lag before we fully experience the consequences of the carbon levels that we have today. And so that's pretty, if you actually stop and think about it, that's pretty scary. Our risks related to drought, wildfire, fire, floods, they're growing every year. And it's really a worry. And it really was underlined to me a couple of Sundays ago. I attended a virtual panel discussion where 6 extremely articulate, smart, passionate youth in our valley talked about their climate anxiety and the actions they're taking collectively to support one another and to support social change to address climate change. And it was a super great lesson in hope for me. Hats off to the Earth Guardians here in the Cowichan Valley. And I think I'm really looking forward to our strategic planning session where we can maybe delve into this issue a little bit more deeply than we have today. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison, and I appreciate you working on behalf of the region in that work with obviously Director Staples, Mayor Staples, and the rest of the crew. And I was just going to say, obviously, this can be picked up as a discussion amongst the board at the strategic planning sessions on the horizon. So thank you for the update and thank you for that work. So I will move back to our regular agenda, and I believe we are at correspondence. So Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C1 is correspondence from BC Transit regarding a request for proposal South Island, Cowichan Valley, and Victoria Handy Dart, and this is for information.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board at this time? Director Sebring, and then Director Nicholson. Director Sebring, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I read that letter, and I have to say I'm a little bit concerned at the notion that the tender now is for Handy Dart to be run out of Victoria. It kind of takes away the local knowledge and the local customization potentially that we have here with respect to places like the Clement Center and stuff like that. I don't know whether this board has any input into how that contract is awarded, but the very process and the very notion that we would be lumped in with the Capital Regional District for a contract like this frankly concerned me.
I understand they can bid on that separately, but maybe Mr. Wakeham can give us some clarity.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very similar to what happened last year. In 2019, the North Central Island did the same thing where they amalgamated Comox, Port Alberni, and Campbell River, and they ended up with one operator for that 3 areas. The intent is to go out, and as the letter states, there could be 2 different providers. There could be one for Cowichan Valley, there could be one for Victoria, or if it plays out that way with the efficiencies of the bids, you could end up with one. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it as being lumped in with Victoria Custom. It's just a different region. The intent is that the bid would go out and it would be evaluated to see which was more beneficial. At this point, it's undetermined how many bidders there'll be, but it's expected to be pretty competitive in the 3 to 5 range, which is pretty good from BC Transit's perspective.
But from my perspective, I talked to the operator who's running the paratransit thing here now, or I'm sorry, Handy Dart, and they're saying they're not big enough to bid on the whole thing, and they're worried that the efficiency thing will mean that there'll be an operator from Victoria who doesn't have the local knowledge and the ability to customize locally the way it's being done right now. Do we as a board have any input to say, sorry, but that Victoria bid may be a better bang for the dollar, but it doesn't provide the services we need? Is there any input that we have there?
I mean, Mr. Chair, I can provide an answer to that. Unfortunately, it is a BC Transit responsibility initiative, and the BC Transit Board's plan is to go out to bid where there's regions where they can provide a joint bid to try and get more efficient operations. Your point is well taken and understandable. I can understand it's Oak Transit. I can understand Oak Transit's situation. They are a fairly small organization. They've had knowledge of operating our transit system for the custom service since 2014, I believe, so about 6 years. But that is the situation that we are faced with, and no different, quite frankly, than Lake Cowichan Community Services. They've been providing services in a very small area for us for many, many years. They too are very, very small, and I suspect they may or may not bid on the overall RFP because it will be much bigger for sure.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to put my concerns on the record.
Yeah, and I'll enter the discussion. Sorry, I have Directors Nicholson and then Yanni DiNardo. So Director Nicholson, and I'll add you to my speakers list, Tim. Director Nicholson.
Those are exactly my concerns. I really hate to see local organizations being pushed out with something like this. I think it's going in the wrong direction.
Thank you. And I just, to insert myself, I'm going to do it anyway, but it does say that there can be a separate bid for all Cowichan Valley services. So I would contend that if Oak Transit and the existing providers came together, that they could probably submit a joint bid that would preserve their existing services, but come in as a group. But obviously what they're looking for is discounts on cost of service by amalgamating some of these bids, right? So I do understand those concerns. I have Director Yanni DiNardo, then McGonigal, then Staples, and then alternate Director Tatham. But so Tatum, Director Yanni DiNardo, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I also have the same concerns. I think smaller is better. Oak Transit's done an amazing job with local people. And sometimes I think that we think that the bigger is better and we don't get the same kind of product. And I think that we need to be totally aware of that. And I'm not too sure what we can do as a group either to sort of relay our concerns. But I think that Oak Transit has done an amazing job and we've been following them for all these years. And I think it'd be a shame that it would go to a bigger operator and that wouldn't have the same local flavor. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McGonigal, you're next.
I hate to say I agree with the previous 15 speakers, but I agree with the previous 4 speakers. I think it's very important to have that connectivity with community. And I think there is that with those small operations, whether it be community services, service within Lake Cowichan or Handy Dart that is throughout Cowichan Valley. I do note as part of the evaluation that they are inviting a representative of the Cowichan Valley Regional District to participate in that. And my question would be, would that be an elected official or a staff member to take that part?
Through staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent would be a staff person. At this point, that's what BC Transit has asked of me. If there's a different desire, then I can put that forward. I mean, I did plan to. It will take a considerable amount of time consumption for those 3 or 4 weeks, but that is their intent at this point.
And if I may follow up, I would just wonder if a staff person and an elected official could be placed upon that evaluation team to voice the concerns of the directors already spoken about and those that are to follow, I'm sure, if that is applicable to this situation or just to keep it staff to staff, I'm not sure. But I think some political involvement within an elected official might be appropriate, and I may be speaking out of turn, but that's just my thought.
I'll get your opinion on that, Mr. Wakeham, but my opinion would be that the decision-making process in terms of the RFP is really a staff function. However, I think if there's a concerns on the level of the board that we may want to give them those concerns before they go out with this tender on July 14th, it looks like on or about July 14th. Mr. Wakeham, I would look to you in terms of evaluating RFPs. I think that's really blurring the lines in terms of the political role. I think the political role would be to advocate now and then delegate the appropriate staff to look at the RFP. But Mr. Wakeham, is there an opportunity for us to provide what sounds like probably universal feedback from the board that we have concerns about sort of the amalgamation of these services when we've been working with these providers for some time?
I agree with all your comments. You could, if you like, we could draft a letter that could be sent in the next week before then, expressing our concerns. But I can tell you, since I've just been discussing for the last year with them, this is their intent. And we always got to remember, as much as all the comments are very well understood and expected, all tenders and all bids that we go through, as much as we would like to see local residents or local companies, we can't give favoritism to them in anything. It is the most successful bid, whether it's price or price and other initiatives. That's what wins it. So if you want, I could work with the board members to draft something. Quite frankly, I don't think it's going to change anything. I don't think it's going to. BC Transit has been wanting to do this for about three specific different times over the last 9 years. But there was always really good reasons for why the initiative was postponed. Originally, Lady Smith was just joining the service. The second one was we couldn't connect with another region, which would have been Victoria Custom, to go out to bid together to get some efficiencies. And the third one was, of course, we just started building a new facility. So that's all done. BC Transit would like to move ahead. And I would concur as well. They're looking for a staff member at the end. I think or to participate. I think you'd be blurring the lines if you offered a political individual, but that's your wish if you'd like me to address that.
Okay, thank you. I'll go Director Staples next, then Tatum, and then Wilson and Sebring again.
So yes, thank you. I'm just echoing the same things that have already been said and adding to that. Would this be an appropriate time to make, and do we need a motion to direct staff to write a letter basing and outlining the concerns that we have about the way that this process is unfolding. And even suggesting that we would, I hear what Mr. Wakeham is saying about them wanting to change, but because they want to change doesn't mean that we want that change. And so is this our opportunity to say, you know, we would like the same type of procurement process for this part of the service to remain as it has in the past?
If I may comment, Mr. Chair. So I think what I'm understanding from you is you're wishing to consider the RFP that goes out for Cowichan, and I'm making an assumption here that you would like to separate potentially custom from the other services, or is the intent to have them all separated? For those directors that don't know, we have 3 current service providers right now, and even though all the comments you've made are very valid, sometimes from a customer perspective, I'm not even talking efficiencies. From a customer perspective, and even staff, it's not efficient in the sense of right now we have 3 operators, renting 3 different offices, 3 different administrations, 3 different phone numbers, 3 different lost and founds. When customers look for feedback from the operator, they are dealing with 3 different entities. So it is not a simple, smooth process. But if you'd like, again, I would support if you'd like to put a motion forth that I could take and draft a letter on, if you wish, to send to BC Transit very shortly, like in the next couple of days, to say that we would I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to say that we would desire if the bid for Cowichan could separate the custom service from conventional and commuter, if that's what I'm understanding your wish to be.
Director Staples?
Well, I mean, I'm putting it out to the board as a suggestion for direction on this. I mean, there should be a letter if it's addressing our concerns. I'm not sure how else our concerns would be addressed, but I would put that out to the board.
The way to put it to the board would be to make the motion, we'll get a seconder, and then we'll go from there. So I'm supportive of it.
So I would need a seconder then.
Director Yanni DiNardo is seconding, and I'm pretty sure there would be several other hands, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the resolution, Mr. Wakeham, I think we're moving what he said, which is what you just said, which is that we would request that they separate out the commuter, conventional, and custom transit services in the RFP.
Can I just seek clarification here? So as you've identified 3 different services, which right now is not separated. Right now we have custom separated from conventional and commuter, and UBO as well. So if I could just ask for clarification on the motion, I think what you're asking is that the bid go out separating the custom service from the rest, being Cowichan, UBO, and the commuter. Is that correct?
For clarity, custom means handy dart?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so yes, I think that was the intent of the motion. I think I saw Director Staples nod. Director Yanni DiNardo, who seconded, is nodding, so that is the intention.
Okay, thank you. I can draft that and get it out hopefully by Monday next week.
Okay, so I do have a speakers list, but do we need to speak on the motion? If I'm not seeing hands on the motion, so sorry, I can't see Director Sebring because he's hidden by controls now. Director Sebring, you want to speak to the motion?
Yes, I do. I just, and this was the same point I was going to make before, but it's really the reason for the motion. If you look at the correspondence from BC Transit, it says provide proponents with only 3 options, and therein lies the problem. One of the options is a separate bid for Victoria Handy Dart Services. We want an option for a separate bid for Cowichan Handy Dart Services. That's really fundamentally, from my perspective, what this motion will provide us with. And if I'm wrong, Mr. Wakeham can correct me.
Okay. Mr. Wakeham, you took your microphone off. So.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. Yes, I was just thinking here. So ultimately, what we're suggesting is that there would be 4 bids or 4 potential bids, which means you could have an operator for Victoria, you could have 2 for Cowichan as opposed to 3 now. I'll put it forth. I don't know how much strength it's going to have, I'll be honest with you, but I will put forth the effort and make it on your behalf.
Thank you. If the board passes the resolution, I think I saw Director Acton wanted to speak to the motion as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll probably be the only one saying this, but I will not be supporting the motion. I think we're kind of trying to direct things that we don't even, like, what are the consequences of doing this? And, you know, so I'm not too supportive of that. And actually of all the services that are shared with other provincial jurisdictions, and the Handy Dart one is one that I actually get a lot of complaints about. So I don't believe they're doing as good a job as they could. So perhaps they could actually, you know, by streamlining it would be a better service. I know that there are a lot of people in Shawnigan Lake cannot get the service, and it has not been easy for them when they're calling and trying to navigate that system, and has not been very supportive.
Thank you. Mr. Carruthers, did you want to speak to this?
No, other than just to reaffirm the comments that were made about the political process or political involvement in the reviewing of bids, that sort of thing. I mean, I think Mr. Wakeham raised a really good point about the efficiency of combining those together. You know, that was part of the purpose of having the new maintenance facility built, was that all of the fleet and all of our buses could be maintained in one single facility, maintained consistently by one operator. So there was some rationale behind that approach. But again, the will of the board to move forward with your request.
Thank you. So I have no more. Do I have anybody else on the motion? I really think that we can be more efficient in passing the motion if that's what the board wants. But Director Nicholson, you're next.
Actually, I have a question, so I don't need to do it right now.
Well, if you have a question, because I think this motion would kind of close this item. It was just an information item or correspondence item. So go ahead with your question.
Well, I'm just curious as whether this is coming out of the blue for the local transit providers, or whether they have been there's been discussions before now about the need for greater efficiency, and whether they're interested in combining efforts or whatever.
Thank you. Mr. Wakeham, can you provide us insight on that?
Sure. The operators have been aware of this for a number of years. I could tell you it goes back right to when Volunteer Cowichan used to look after the custom, which was prior to Oak Transit. Because at that time, BC Transit was talking about an RFP then, but it was delayed. So all the operators are well aware of it. I can understand the concerns of the smaller operators for sure. Those are all very valid. You know, I have no problem taking your direction and writing the letter to BC Transit. Where it's going to end up, I don't know.
Thank you. So I had Director Tatum and Wilson on my speakers list, and I believe I have now Director Hain to the motion as well. Director Tatum, did you want to speak to this?
I think everybody said everything I needed them to say for me, so I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah. Is this on the motion, or is it it's only on the motion, right?
Well, we're talking about this letter, and the motion is.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I'm a little bit concerned about this as well. And Al's brought up some good points. I'm in complete support of the motion. I think it's a great idea, because what bothers me the most is, you know, when people start up these businesses, and we're always being told local, 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 and that's a great thing. We need to support our local businesses, and this is one of those instances which is very similar to what is or could happen with the refuse collection service that we use up here. It's small family business, looks like it's going to be run over by a gargantuan monster, and that's not what should be happening here with the individuals. We should be supporting the local businesses and doing as much as we can for them.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but as soon as we start making it based on local businesses, we're violating laws that are above our level in terms of tender and trade rules and things like that. So we can't reflect on it as local. I understand what you're saying, and I think we all share that opinion. But when it comes to tendering process and rules, specifying that you want to support a local provider is against the law, essentially.
I appreciate that. I'm fully acquainted with the tendering business. I've been in there for a while myself, as most people here have. But having said that, there are ways that we can support local businesses. It doesn't have to be in a way that you're defining there, but we need to support those businesses in every way that we can legally.
Yeah. So I will go to Director Hain to hopefully close. Mr. Wakeham, you want to speak to this first?
Thank you. I just want to make one comment here. Bear in mind that one of BC Transit's strongest points is all about efficiency and doing things as cost effective as possible. And so when I asked for them to consider breaking out another option that Cowichan could have 2 operators, I don't know how kindly they're going to accept that, because the intent is typically to gain efficiencies by more volume. So I'm just throwing that out to the committee. If we were successful with writing a letter and getting 2 bids, you may end up possibly with higher costs than what you're even paying now. So that isn't the intent. The intent is to make it more efficient when you have the synergies of blending various operations. I just want to make that comment.
Thank you. I'll go to Director Haim and then we'll have Director Sebring on the motion.
Couple of quick points. The same thing that Mr. Wakeham just brought up with regards to the efficiency side. Be very careful what you ask for, especially when it's another organization effectively that is controlling the service. The other thing relates to some of the comments that have been made, and I just draw your attention to the last paragraph of the letter from BC Transit. You are asked not to endorse in relation to it. And so when it comes to some of the comments, whether or not that would be considered endorsement, I understand the intent of the motion, and while I appreciate it, I can't support it.
Thank you. I'll go to Director Sebring, and then I've got a few comments, and hopefully we can call the question.
All right, just this. I mean, I understand the push for efficiency, but with Handy Dart in specific, we're dealing with a specific segment of the population, which I'm sorry, but in my opinion, requires some local knowledge and local expertise. And if that costs us a little more to service that particular underserviced sector of society, I, for one, am prepared to pay that slightly extra cost. This cannot be just about efficiencies. If it was just about efficiencies, BC Transit would hand out the contract for the whole damn province. That's not how it works. At least that's not how it should work. We are accountable to provide and to oversee the kind of services that are provided within our jurisdiction. I'm not endorsing Oak Transit. I'm not endorsing anybody. I'm saying we need a service provider that knows the Cowichan Valley, knows the specific needs, understands things like the schedule of the Clement Center and places like that. And that is much better done by somebody who's here than somebody who's operating it out of Victoria. And that's the point. And if it costs us a few extra pennies per ride, so be it.
They'll be operating in our community out of our facility. They wouldn't be operating out of Victoria. Just like transit.
Managed out of Victoria.
I appreciate that you love to interrupt me when I was making my comments, but this wouldn't be an operator out of Victoria. It would be an operator out of our facility with local people, and who knows, maybe some of the existing drivers would even work for them. My point would be that I also will not support this, and I think that it's a reality that we have to deal with, that if these existing providers want to collaborate on a compelling bid that shows good cost efficiencies, and they can bring some of their existing knowledge to the routes and to the RFP process, that they could very well end up being the providers moving forward, but they would have to collaborate on a bid that would be competitive for all of those services in the Cowichan Valley, as is expressed in option 1. So I appreciate that, and I'm happy to write the letter. I think it'll be, frankly, from my perspective, dismissed out of hand. But I'm happy to support that, that the board may want me to sign that letter. And if that's the case, I'll do it. So I will call the question. All those in favor? And opposed?
Just a point of clarity. Was it Mr. Wakeham or the chair that was going to sign this letter?
I'll put that through to staff. Usually when the board sends a letter, the chair signs it, but I believe Mr. Wakeham would probably draft it. I see staff nodding, so the chair would sign it.
I'm doing that. I just wanted to make sure what we were doing. Thanks.
I'm going to call opposed again, just so we have so Ms. Legault can count our hands. So the directors Acton, Manhas, Smith, Stone, Haim, and Morrison. So the motion passes with those, I believe it was 6 in opposition. Okay, so now we can, Director Acton.
May I speak?
And
there was
just trying to get to the second correspondence item on our agenda. Go ahead.
The topic of, so I just wanted some clarity around the topic of procurement. with local providers. I actually thought that we were able as a regional district to change the wording or to change our policy so that we would choose local over. There's no way. It's always about cost. You can't.
As soon as you go over, I believe there's a certain dollar value you cannot prefer local bids. And this would be well over that threshold, I believe.
There's nothing we can do in our policies to change that.
I believe that it starts at federal law around trade policies and trickles down through provincial law, but I don't think we can, I know for a fact we can't impose policies that would prefer local bids.
If I can, Mr. Chair, just for clarity, you're going to be receiving an update from the collaborative, the hub, for social procurement in terms of the initiatives that are underway to assist local governments in looking at strategic procurement within their policies. So stay tuned, that work is to come.
Thank you. All right, so we will move on to, I believe we're on C2. So it's correspondence from the Premier and Minister of Municipal Affairs regarding UBCM convention meeting requests. So just for my information through to staff, do you need resolutions to make these meeting requests, or can I work with directors on specific items, or do you want a list of requests now?
So essentially this, Mr. Chair, is just a request to meet with the ministers. And so if you're inclined to want to make that request, we're going to need to know what the items are. And we would have to have time to start developing the brief to go with those items. So it was an opportunity for the board to discuss whether or not they had any issues they wanted to address and to give staff some direction to start working on that.
Okay. I can definitely pitch one, but I'm sure other directors, like I saw Director Smith's hand up. So I would say if you have, my experience has been any key infrastructure projects are best to go with the ministers. Premier stuff, and again, other directors have had different experiences, but more higher level strategic discussions. But I would happily support any directors that have key projects that need to have some engagement with the province. I've got Director Smith and then Director Morrison.
So yes, I would like to work to have an appointment with Honorable Selena Robinson regarding the Saltair water filtration treatment system.
Okay. Great. I was going to put that one forward, but I didn't want to steal your thunder. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was pulling up the letter to see where we were on as far as a deadline goes for this. Just wanted to bring a little, oh, my screen just went dead. This is going to be kind of an interesting year as far as UBCM and ministerial appointments and the likes. And I think that there's a bit of a push to make sure that any time spent in minister meetings and those kind of initiatives are not repeat initiatives that have been before the UBCM before ministers before. So I think they're asking that people be very selective. And I think the one that Director Smith has just brought up is somewhat unique. And I think they're just giving guidance that because of the uniqueness of the situation that we I don't want to say put forward frivolous resolutions, but we make sure that we've got a solid case and something fairly new and unique. Like I wouldn't want to go back on questions of a new local government act, since they've heard the requests, said no, and that's the end of it. I wouldn't want to go back with that request again. So do we have time to contemplate what some of those ideas might be and collaborate with our parliamentarian and our corporate officer and staff to craft what would be a good suite of appointments and topics to put forward? That might be through to Mr. Carruthers.
The deadline is August 4th to request a meeting with the minister. So we do have some time this month to pull that together. From my past experience, we may have a little bit more time to massage the actual items that we're bringing forward. I know the minister wants a briefing book prior to the meeting, but I think we can make the request by August 4th, give them a general idea of what we want to speak about, but I think we can modify that afterwards if other items came forward.
Follow-up?
So just as a follow-up, would it be a good idea for us to put forward the requests that we might have, and for we to all have a look and essentially be sort of in agreement as to what we want to put forward, or are we just going to go as you know, individual requests and put them forward, or are we going to have a look at them as a group?
Go ahead, Mr. Carruthers. I thought we were going to kind of make a list and then discuss them as a group.
Yeah, I would suggest you coordinate them and prioritize them.
Yeah. So, sorry, Mr. Carruthers, if I can go back to you though, would that mean we're like, I'm kind of maintaining a list here, and if we have those meetings we want to have, now is the time to do that, and then we can, you know, provide staff direction to prepare meetings with these ministers on these subjects, correct?
So keep in mind, this is simply for the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the Premier. We have a second request for the other cabinet ministers to meet with them. So what I'm going to suggest you do is you have between now and July 22nd at your next board meeting to think about topics and to potentially discuss. Come back on July 22nd and we can fine tune that list so that staff can then get that request together before August 4th.
So you're comfortable with having enough time after July 26th to get the books and the briefing notes and everything?
We don't need the briefing notes for the request. We'll just simply make the request with the topics, and then over the course of the time before UBCM, we can pull the briefings together.
Okay, thank you. So I will say then maybe at this time, unless the directors want to, that we take it back and put it on our individual to-do lists and see if there's anything that we see are critical items to meet with. I would say also other ministers as well, because those requests will come. So I'm going to ask directors not to use the chat function. We're in a public meeting, so I appreciate that it's nice to pass each other notes, but I really would appreciate if you put your hand up and then just remark the information. It's a distraction. So we do have the one on Saltair water treatment, but I think we can defer the actual list to the next meeting then. Thank you. So if the directors don't have any other comments for now, we'll take that away as homework. The only reason I reflect on Director Smith's request was I had spoken with the minister and she said, get your request in for UBCM. So is there any further discussion right now? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we'll move on to the next one. So I believe we're down to number 10, CR1. And that's committee and commission reports from Regional Services Committee. So I'll put that over to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report and recommendation of the Regional Services Committee meeting of June 24th is, the recommendation is one of three. One, the recommendation outlined in the staff report to the June 8th, 2020 Regional Services Committee on the groundwater quality survey of aquifers 197 and 198. Be included in the South Cowichan Liquid Waste Management Plan and the Regional Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program for implementation. Two, that the Cowichan Watershed Society, providing services as a Cowichan Watershed Board, be granted $50,000 under the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program to further strategic partnerships and initiatives to support the drinking water protection objectives. Three, that item number R3, Parks and Trails Invasive Plant and Habitat Management Program, be referred to the Electoral Area Services Committee for further discussion. And I move those three.
So before you go to that, I believe Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Chair. I have to recuse myself from this vote for item number CR2, number 2. I sit on the Cowichan Watershed Society and the board as a Cowichan Tribes Councillor.
Thank you.
If someone can move me into the lobby.
Okay, when that's done, we'll resume our discussion.
Okay. Could I move 1 and 3, and then she leaves for 2?
I think she was okay with leaving for this item. She called and said that she would just step out for CR1. So.
So I moving the 1 and then she comes back and I move 2 and 3. No, there's this. Okay, so I move those 3.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Director Wilson, and to speak to the motion. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to just hold this up here. This is an article from the Times columnist a few days ago. And as you know, Aquifer 197, any of the aquifers down here in the south are one of my great passions. And just to make sure that we are all on the same page here, as BC transitions to post-acute crisis recovery, water security will not be an optional consideration or something simply nice to have. Rather, investing stimulus funding in watersheds is a crucial investment to British Columbians' long-term health and security. The provincial government itself has named the problems last year. It identified water shortage on top as top climate risks facing BC. Gravity of the situation is only amplified by a recent report from the Auditor General identifying grave concern with drinking water protection in the province. Now, we all know how important this is. That really was to amplify just how seriously I take this particular thing. I have no problem with supporting these at all. I would also ask that the directors take into consideration Mr. Yearling's submission at public input. I've asked for copies of that. I haven't had any response for that yet. Basically, as I understand it, he is asking that the Shawnigan Basin Society be made a strategic partner with the Cowichan Watershed Society to use their expertise as part of the South as well. I would support that suggestion with a great deal of vigor. But otherwise, I will support this and just reiterate again, we can't do without this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just ask people to keep their comments to the motion if we can. Director Tatum.
Yes, I'm curious about the $50,000 amount and how that was decided, and if it was itemized or if it was part of a budget, or how that amount came.
The presentation was just given to the board either the last meeting or the previous meeting with the annual reports that break down all the budgets. We can make that available to you, but to dig into that now would be a lengthy exercise, but we can provide that to you if you'd like.
That would be good. It is itemized, though. Is that what you're saying? The $50,000 is itemized?
Yep, there's detailed budgets on all the spend, and the $50,000 is a small amount compared to all the leveraged funding that they've gained, and it's well itemized and well detailed and documented.
Okay, you don't need to provide it. I'll take your word for it.
It's on CWB's website. If you look up Cowichan Watershed Board, all the annual reports and breakdowns and budgets are there.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't have anyone else on my speakers list. It's been moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
That is my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Yanni DiNardo. Move on to, I believe we're on staff reports, Ms. Legault. SR1 is a staff report from the General Manager, Engineering Services Department regarding the Union of British Columbia Municipalities Community Excellent Award application. And the recommendation is that an application to UBCM Community Excellence Award category asset management for the CVRD's Corporate Strategic Asset Management Plan be approved. That's been moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion on that other than my inability to speak? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you for that. We could use lots of acronyms to shorten that one. Moving on, SR2 is a verbal report and PowerPoint presentation from Barry O'Riordan, Manager of Economic Development Division, regarding the summary of post-disaster needs assessment. Mr. O'Riordan, oh, there you are. Welcome. Are you going to be putting forward your presentation with us?
Yes, I'll put it on the screen here and let me know when you see it.
Great, thank you. We can see it. Well, we can see that you're starting to share content. There we go.
Okay, give me 1 second here. Oh, let's get this working here. Okay, let's go with it like this. So, good evening. In the following presentation, I will provide a brief overview of the results of the Cowichan COVID-19 Business Survey number 1. The agenda includes why do the survey, what we found out, and reporting out. So, why did we undertake the survey? As we are all keenly aware, beginning in mid-March, a number of travel restrictions, business closures, and physical distancing measures were put in place throughout Cowichan in response to COVID-19. These actions taken by various levels of government to protect public health amounted to an intentional shutdown of the economy. As of mid-April, this shutdown has resulted in an unprecedented shock to the Canadian labour market, with BC unemployment rate reaching 13.4% in May.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Reardon, your slides aren't changing.
Oh, excuse me. So I can.
Is Deborah back? Just checking.
Ms. Legault, did you bring Director Toporowski back in?
I'm here.
Okay, thanks.
I might need to stop sharing my screen here and redo it. Give me 1 sec.
So it just came up. We're on why do the survey? Oh, there, now we're back to the first screen.
Okay. We're good now?
Seem to be, thank you.
Good, thank you. So the gradual easing of COVID-19 restrictions and the reopening of the economy presents both opportunities and challenges for employers and workers. For employers, this includes adapting workplaces, adjusting to disruptions in the global supply chains and uncertainties in consumer demand. This survey was completed to assess Cowichan-specific data on the impact of COVID-19 on local business community and to inform the work of Cowichan business support organizations. Survey number 1 was completed from May 19 to 27th, with survey 2 to be launched in the coming weeks. Key findings of the survey include that 56% of businesses have temporarily shut down at the time of the survey. 62% have seen reductions in revenue greater than 75%. 54% of businesses have seen reduced staff levels, and 37% have experienced supply chain disruptions. In this, businesses have responded in many ways, but here are some of the following. 30% have incorporated online ordering options to their business operations. 24% now offer delivery options, and 19% were allowing workers to work remotely. We can also expect some long-term changes coming out of the business models as a result of this. The businesses identified 33% that they will have increased participation in the digital economy and in terms of the long-term changes. 36% will incorporate long-term changes that having increased sanitation, and 11% expect ongoing occupancy challenges. So the greatest challenge in returning to regular business operations were identified in the following broad categories. So this was an open-ended question that was given to businesses, and they responded with free-form text, and we gathered that information into general themes. So the biggest one was 57% identified either operational or health and safety challenges. 35% expressed financial challenges in terms of financial viability, opening up in the current circumstances. And 32% identified fear for lack of consumer confidence as their greatest challenge. Within the survey, we did ask business owners to identify the ways the event affected both the mental and physical well-being of those business owners and their staff. Again, these responses were summarized into themes from people's pre-formed text, and a number of themes emerged. 26% of business owners expressed that they were either exhausted, had no energy, were overwhelmed, or experiencing anxiety or depression. 31% identified that they were either stressed or very stressed, and 13% said they were significantly negatively impacted, using those words. This is one aspect of the study that was not repeated in broader BC or Canadian studies, focusing on the business community, and it was a significant finding in my eyes. Some major themes also emerged from the question on what business owners would see as a vision emerging post COVID-19. 30% identified the desire to build community coming out of this. 24% want more people to shop locally, and 16% expressed that they hope the public will be understanding of their situation and treat them with compassion and kindness as they struggle to survive. So I think we're still in that mode. So who have we shared the results with? So the results were published to the general public on June 16th, and a longer format of the survey, which expanded on those individual responses of business owners, was shared with the Cowichan Strong partners, which includes Community Futures Cowichan, Duncan Cowichan Chamber of Commerce, and the other chambers and BIAs in Cowichan, as well as Tourism Cowichan. It was also shared with some other community stakeholders that are focused on response and recovery. So how are the results being used? They're informing recovery activities of these business support organizations, as well as the work of Economic Development Cowichan through buy local campaigns, support for Island Good, informing webinars, and feeding into advocacy, as well as grant applications for various projects. It's also informing future activities of these organizations. So to conclude, if the board have any questions or have any further direction on how these results should be used, then I'd happy to hear that or open up to any questions.
Thank you. And if you can lower the presentation and stop sharing the screen, then we can I can see everyone, and then we can go to questions from the board. Any questions from Mr. O'Riordan? First, Director Yanni DiNardo. And I've got Director Manhas and Morrison next, and I'll keep watching for hands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. O'Riordan. Thanks, Barry. I wondered what I've noticed in the community, the shop local has been very seriously undertaking, and then a lot of people are really paying attention to that with COVID. Have you heard from any of the shopkeepers if they've how their business is going locally? Has it improved in any way, for that matter, like with the local campaign that they're doing?
Thank you. For the most part, the businesses that I have talked to have been doing well enough to survive at the moment. But that situation also is tempered by the fact that they are getting supports, ongoing supports from the government. So that situation may also change as these supports are removed in the future. So I think it's too early to tell how many businesses will be in a condition to survive at this time next year. But yeah, Economic Development Cowichan and all the other organizations, as well as the community at large, are definitely doing their best to support local organizations or local businesses.
Thank you. And just to the more about the shop local piece, Director Yanni DiNardo, I can say as like a local shopkeeper myself, I would say that I see a definite mood in the community to support small local businesses. The challenge is that it's still a lower proportion of our regular customer base, right? So although the people that are coming in are saying, we're so glad you're open, we're so glad you're still here, and we're here to support you. There's still a much lower customer volume than normal. It's just that as a percentage, more people are saying, we want to support you. It's just a much smaller group of people, unfortunately. I have Director Manhas and then Morrison, and then I missed a hand, Director Smith. Director Manhas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Reardon, for this report. How many businesses actually responded? Because we saw percentages, but what was the total amount of business that responded to your survey?
71, I think.
The total that completed the survey was 70.
70.
And were they broadly based or specific to some sector or?
Yeah, it definitely was a higher concentration within Duncan and also a higher concentration within food and beverage and retail.
Okay.
It's definitely closer representation of those groups, but the survey results is fairly closely in line with what the provincial studies have also released.
Okay. I think what's really helped a lot of the businesses is the $40,000 a loan from the federal government, and 25% is a grant, which to be paid back, and the $30,000 is to be paid back in 2022. I think that's really helped a lot of the businesses here locally and across the province. Also, on your mental and physical well-being, were the respondents mostly shut down or were they operating businesses?
The majority of them were still operating.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Morrison, then Smith, then Acton. Director Morrison.
Thank you for the report, Mr. Reardon. I'm just, I think I'm going to ask you for maybe a bit of an anecdotal response to a question, but just in observing the report, and for some reason I can't bring it up on my iPad, but it was a little thin in the West Cowichan area as far as respondents go, and so that will kind of skew numbers a little bit. I noted that heavily response from the core area, mostly Duncan, but the concern that I have is so many of the businesses in this region, the Cowichan Lake area and the lakes, other than perhaps forestry and some others that have been continuing to operate through the COVID-19 crisis, so much of the business in this area is travel and tourism dependent. And, I've got a operation just up the road here, the Honeymoon Bay Retreat, that I think just had their first guest a couple of weeks ago. And so I can understand a lot of those anxiety and stress comments from people. Now, I did say about a third of them were going along pretty much as per normal. But the question that I wanted to ask was, have you got any insight as to how the reduced travel, the reduced tourism might be impacting those areas that are really dependent on it? We're seeing visitors to this area, but not in the numbers that we're used to. And a lot of these businesses are operating 4, 5, 6 months of the year and are wholly dependent on making an annual income on 4, 5, or 6 months of operation, and there's been a huge bite taken out of that. So, have you got any insights or thoughts around impacts and where this survey might not have touched on in regards to the areas covered?
So this survey was pre phase 3, so it wouldn't have captured any of that regional tourism, which is just starting to take off. So I think it's too early to tell. Definitely there's been a huge impact on the tourism industry, and that will likely continue through this year. So I think a significant number of tourism industry businesses are in dire straits. So I think the fact that BC is in a relatively good position and people can't travel anywhere else, people are starting to travel more regionally, and there may be an opportunity there to now focus on that. I know Tourism Couching is doing that, but I think it's far too early to tell whether what portion of these businesses are going to survive through this.
Follow up?
Thank you. And just briefly, some of our local organizations and the director from Area I and myself in the town have gotten together to put up some signage that, you know, we recognize that people are coming to the area and we want to keep safe Cowichan Lake safe. And, you know, we're doing what we can, but it's going to be a tough go for those people that are tourism related across the region. And we have to do a lot of that, be a tourist in your own backyard type of promotion. It's really important to keeping the businesses that we have afloat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Smith, you're next, then Director Acton.
Thank you for the report. Some of the things I noticed is there's no indication of the size of the business and the number of employees for each of those businesses. That might have been something that would be beneficial to know which ones are more impacted than others. And in Saltaire, of course, we have the micro-rural businesses, which is something that a lot of electoral areas have. And I know that they were extremely impacted. And there is no detail sort of indicating whether they're a micro-rural business for some of these businesses, which might have been helpful too. I mean, I check in with the businesses in my area at least once a week and see how they're doing and see if there's something we can help them with. But they're just so busy trying to survive. It's definitely, you can see the stress and the strain, and especially when they have family involved too, and them both working. I think that there's a lot of stress, and everyone's well-being, whether they're in business or not in business, is being impacted. One of the things that I was just wondering, who are the stakeholders that are focusing on recovery and response that you didn't list them in your presentation? Is there quite a list that some of these businesses can connect with?
So the primary stakeholders that I've been working with is the Cowichan Strong Partnership, which includes Tourism Cowichan Society, Community Futures Cowichan, the Duncan Cowichan Chamber of Commerce, as well as Shemanis and Ladysmith, and also all of the business improvements area societies and EIAs within Cowichan. So we meet on a weekly basis, a web call to discuss what's best practice, what people are working on, what anecdotal information each of us is seeing on the ground, and how our activities can coordinate and work together to maximize the resources that we do have. I've also been sitting in on Cowichan Task Leaders weekly calls, which is working with Social Planning Cowichan and our Cowichan Health Network and other organizations, including BOSS, and Mayor Staples and Director Staples is often on that call as well as the province has representation there. So these same discussions and the extended survey has been shared with that group.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else on my speakers list unless I missed a hand, because Director Acton waved me off. All right, so no further discussion. I just have a couple of comments. Mr. O'Riordan, thanks for that work. I would suggest everybody look at some of the other surveys that are out there as well. I think that I know that other chambers have done other sort of smaller sample size surveys. The local chamber did one here. When you start to overlay this data, you do see a lot of themes come out. But I think that Mr. O'Riordan, there's an intention, I believe, to do another survey not too long down the road, now that we are into phase 3, and sort of and seeing how these moods and issues are progressing. Because I think if maybe we can go back and look at the video, there's been some suggestions that have been made by the directors here that if we incorporate them into the next survey, might be able to give us a little bit more data that we can kind of drill into a little bit further. Would you just comment on what surveys may be on the horizon?
Yes, I'm working on a draft of the next round of surveys, and the intention is to have that out once phase 3 has been underway. So we're getting some data that will be representative of phase 3. But I would certainly welcome any questions that you would like to have incorporated within that I would be able to add. These surveys, if we want people to actually do them, they need to be really short, less than 7 minutes. So if there are specific questions, then send it to me and I'll have them for consideration for inclusion.
Yeah, and I think it's just that first survey page is usually size of business, annual sales, and of course there's always the prefer not to answer, but knowing employees and, trade sector and, annual gross revenues or something are really important to be able to overlay that data. And the other thing that I would suggest is that most survey tools allow you to correlate responses. So a question that I had was when we look at the mental health data, if you will, or the mood data, are that bigger percentage that feel anxious, etc., could have been the same group that felt the same way about many of those things. So it's really hard to decide if this is representing, I'd have to go back to the slide, but is this 70% and each of a subgrouping of each of them feel like this? Or is this the same 30% that feel all of these things? Do you know what I'm saying? So it would be nice to be able to get some of the raw survey data and be able to correlate somebody's answers, not including their name and business and things like that, but that respondent 6 was feeling this, this, and this, and this is the size and retail trade of their business or their trade sector. It just allows us to actually get more useful data out of it than just these very high level things. So just a couple of suggestions I would make, and I would encourage any of the directors to email Mr. O'Riordan with some input that he may be able to incorporate to make it even more relevant and useful for us.
The only comment I'd have on that is, given the small sample size, that getting meaningful information from subsets of that data is challenging. So some of those questions were answered, but it was deemed I didn't feel that those responses would be statistically significant. So some of those other surveys that came out through the BC Chamber may provide more detailed, reliable statistics on the breakdown between large corporations and different subsectors. There's certainly that information out there on the larger scale, but we did work on some of that sub-analysis.
Thank you. I will say, because I can't help myself, if you're telling us that it's not statistically relevant, then you're undermining the value of doing the surveys to begin with. But I would just take that under advisement. If we're going to do these and they're repeatable and we're going to utilize them and we find them useful, I would say that 70 is a low number for the region, considering that I believe we got maybe more responses from one community within the region. So maybe we can just all maybe assist in promoting the survey to our different connections so that we can get a better sample size for next time.
And just to clarify, that comment on the statistical significance was subsets of information within that.
Well, 70 isn't a statistically significant number based on the number of businesses either, but we could spend a lot of time on this. I'm just saying, utilize the reach that your directors have and we have within our promotion circles to get a better sample size. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, thank you all very much. And thank you, Mr. O'Riordan. And we will move on. I believe, Ms. Legault, we are all the way down to bylaws. All right. So we're under 15.
Correct. So item BEA1 is CBRD bylaw 4332, electoral area B, Shawnigan Lake zoning amendment bylaw 2020 for third reading.
Before it's moved, can I speak to it?
Yeah, go ahead, Director Acton.
We've been given some new information for that property. I'd just like to refer it back for staff to include, to take in consideration the new information that we were provided yesterday, maybe.
That was a referral motion by Director Acton back to staff based on receiving new information. And I believe it was seconded by Director Salmon. Yep. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? This is electoral area directors only, sorry, the other directors, but any electoral area directors opposed? Seeing none, that motion passes. So I believe that takes us down to unfinished business, number 17.
Mr. Chair, I wonder, I know you've bypassed resolution 1, RES 1. I wonder if I could just make a very quick comment on that, or is that out of order?
No, that would be out of order. It's not on the agenda, but you'll have an opportunity to comment on it at our next meeting, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item UB1 is the staff report from the General Manager, Community Services regarding commission meetings during the COVID-19 public health emergency. And the recommendation for consideration is 1, that CVRD commission meetings be held electronically in accordance with provincial orders without live streaming and only as needed. And 2, that staff continue to investigate options to live stream electronic meetings and to hold hybrid in-person electronic meetings and report back to the board after the CVRD enter stage 3 of the CVRD restoration of programs and services plan.
Thank you. Director Acton. Moved? Or is that to speak?
I just have a comment. I'm still struggling with this idea with our commissions and asking them to do electronic stuff. And meanwhile, as we speak, I don't know how other directors are doing with their commissions, but I'm sure mine are falling apart really because we are losing that connection. And I was having some Zoom meetings with my volunteers. But of course, it's not for everyone. It's a low percentage of people who are coming out for them, and those who are appreciate that. But it's still not the same. People, and these are really strong volunteers in our community, and they volunteer for that social connection. So I just wish that we could be a little more creative, or somehow really recognize that we're losing a really strong resource, and what else could we do to ensure that we keep those connections going strong?
I would invite any staff that want to comment. I can only say that as a board, we accept the responsibility as elected officials, and we're having difficulties conducting in-person meetings. So is your desire to have in-person committee meetings?
Well, yeah, that would be the ultimate decision. And at the moment, we could hold stuff in our parks, or, we could be flexible. We could.
I feel like I'm having Groundhog Day because I think we've discussed this at the last 2 meetings. There's a desire there, but as we don't allow bookings at our certain facilities and stuff, we can't then usurp our own rules. But
there's always an excuse, but it still just don't feel like we're being as thoughtful and as creative as we could.
I appreciate that. I don't know if staff wants to comment. I know we probably heard the same refrains, but no comments from staff. I appreciate what you're saying. Like there's a wide gulf of opinions. I would be back to meeting in person on all my meetings and with our committees and stuff like that. But and your committees or commissions may be in that place. But I know from speaking to some of our commissions and committees, if a handful of members say, well, I'm not comfortable with doing that, then you run into these issues. And doing for one area, because one area's volunteers may be comfortable and others not, I just think it complicates it. But I appreciate that because I'm on the same side. I would like to see us be able to facilitate these meetings. And the board does have, some authority there to try and direct something different. But I feel like we've kind of been around the block a couple times on this, but let's hear from the other people and we'll go from there. I have Director Yanni DiNardo, then Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's funny because I have been getting the same comments as well from my commissions, and they're not that big of commissions, and there is outdoors and and I thought we could be a little bit more creative with them too, because they're feeling the same way as Director Acton is saying. And so they're also, as a director, they're a really valuable asset for myself as well. So I just wondered if we could do something or think of something that's a little bit more creative, because our groups are not really that big. Social distancing would be easy to facilitate, I think.
Okay, so I do recognize this was referred back at the last meeting, and it now has been brought back to this meeting again with the same similar recommendation, but I'll go to Director Morrison and then Director Staples.
Well, I'd be prepared to move the recommendation and speak to it if there's a seconder.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Wilson, and you can speak to it, and then I'll go back to the speakers list. Go ahead, Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you're right with your kind of funny reference to Groundhog Day. It happened to have been on regular cable yesterday, and we have thoroughly discussed this, and I think that we as a group need to take a lead and do what we can as far as getting back to our in-person meetings and the likes. But we do have to provide a consistent legal basis for conducting our business and doing our APCs and parks meetings and the likes. And this is what we've got before us right now that we can begin to implement. And maybe the board will be in a different mood when we come back from a meeting-free August, and circumstances may be different, where we can bring a new way of meeting and a more innovative way to things. But in the meantime, I think we have to get this piece of business addressed and look for ways that we can improve on the situation after August. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Staples. And then I put Director Acton, I put you back on there because I realized I jumped off and you had your hand back up for a follow-up. So I'll come back to you if you wish, and then Director Smith. Director Staples, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wonder with the first one with the commission meetings, if some of the commissions are small and the directors are saying that the people feel comfortable meeting outdoors at a safe distance and doing that, can that not be done by a case scenario if the commission members are all in agreement? Is that not a possibility, because it doesn't have to be live streamed? Or
so I'll put that through to staff, but I understand that it's kind of difficult to do maybe special cases, but I would go through to staff to clarify.
Yeah, I would suggest that we attempt to be as consistent as possible with this. I know that it's uncomfortable for everyone. We're all trying to adjust to this new way of doing business. But the one thing that I have found in dealing with the COVID-19 response is the inconsistency is what causes us problems. And so I would just ask that people be patient and that we continue to employ these measures. You know, I'm trying to be consistent with our staff and with our public in terms of the messaging and the leadership that we're showing and responding. And when we're, you know, kind of all over the map, it sends mixed messages to our staff, it sends mixed messages to the community. And I appreciate that it's uncomfortable, but these are extraordinary times. And as your administrator, I'm going to suggest that we stay the course with what we're doing for now, and that we reevaluate it after August and see what the situation looks like in September. A lot of times these measures, extra measures that we're taking, are actually taking more time and more effort than to simply do some of these meetings that we've been actually doing very effectively. So anyway, that's my perspective as your staff.
Thank you. Follow-up? No follow-up?
no, I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Acton?
Well, I forget what I was going to say, but I just want the committee to be aware that we have stated over and over again that we value our commissions, and our inflexibility is we're going to lose our commissions. We're going to lose the people who have signed up already. They're not interested in sitting in a Zoom meeting after working all day. They're there to be a part of the community, and it's done in person. So anyway, I think it's unfortunate that our commissions are going to be even more weakened by the end of this.
Well, it'll be dependent on whether the board shares your opinion. So we haven't voted yet, so let's wait till we have the vote. Director Smith and then Director Hain.
So the Groundhog Day is, I still would like my commissions to be able to meet in the park, and I know that's not possible. We value our commissions. They're very important for electoral area directors. We don't have actual other council to work with. When we're making decisions, we rely on the members of the community. They're part of what a small community is. It's made up of those people, and my commissions are also struggling. But one of the things is in the recommendation, it talks about held electronically. So will staff be training the commission members to be able to do this electronically? Like how will we proceed to do this electronically for our commissions? Is there, I didn't really see anything in here of how we're going to do that. But maybe somebody can help me. Is there staff that's available that could say how they're going to do these electronic meetings and when they're going to get training and how they're going to get training?
From the staff?
Yeah, I would ask if maybe Ms. Gerald can respond to that, given that most of our commissions are in our land use services department. So, Anne, if you had any thoughts on that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I imagine that we would undertake the similar type of training that was provided to the board prior to your first WebEx meeting. So a trial commission meeting to ensure that everybody knows how to use the technology. And as a reminder, the minimum requirement is a telephone. Yeah, so I don't anticipate significant challenges. It is very much like, a typical Zoom meeting.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll go to Director Hain.
Thank you. I share the concerns of Director Acton. Just in the staff report, it says input from members of those commissions indicate roughly half of the members would be capable or willing to meet electronically. For the smaller commissions, we're not going to have quorum. So when it comes to that, as a continuing policy, it's not going to work. Recognizing we are going into the summertime, and I'll speak specifically for my area, nothing burning kind of that needs to be dealt with in the next month or so. I can support this up to September, but basically at that point, we need to have something else in place specifically again for our area where, like I said, I won't have quorum for meetings as it is. So short term, a little bit longer, but not beyond that.
Thank you very much. Director Nicholson and then Sebring. Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think this is we're about community. We should be about community. And to me, it seems that we're very inflexible and very slow to try and come up with a way of making things work for people that I value, and I know many of the directors do. I am wondering if it would be possible to amend the resolution to add under number 1 to be held electronically or out of doors. I'd like to make that amendment if I can. Have a seconder.
I would look to legislative services. I would think that's is that in order? I'm not sure, because that's almost like against the spirit and intent of the original motion, which was to not meet outdoors but to meet electronically. I might suggest that we would defeat this one and then make a new resolution, but I would go through to legislative services to ask that question. If the amendment would be appropriate, if so, I'll ask for a seconder. But again, when I read the report and in the motion, then to add and meet outdoors would be almost contrary to the resolution, which is when amendments are not accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would agree with your interpretation.
So I think if that's the desire of the committee, they would want to defeat this motion and entertain a new motion, or sorry, the board. it would be to entertain a new motion, because the whole report lays out why electronic meetings are necessary over other such alternatives. And we've discussed that before. From a governance point of view, usually you don't take an amendment to a motion that really changes the spirit and intent of the report in motion, right? So my recommendation as the chair would be that if that's how the directors feel, that we would defeat this motion and entertain a new motion that reflects the desire for select areas to be able to meet outdoors. And next on my list, I have Director Sebring, and that's the end of this list. Oh, and then Director Morrison.
My only question is, and you've sort of touched on it, the motion that's before us now, if it's defeated, what options does that leave? I'm like Director Hain, I'm prepared to support this through August, but by September we better find a different way to do this. And if defeating this motion sends the message to staff that they've got to come up with something different by September, then maybe we defeat the motion.
As a fellow governance person, usually that would be an amendment you could make that says until September, but then because that would still be in the spirit and intent of the motion, but would put an end date on it, and then staff would be bound by that motion to come back with an alternative for September.
Why don't we do that?
Well, if you're moving,
I don't know if I can get a seconder to that motion. Where would we insert the up until August 31st? As needed, probably at the end of bullet 1, right?
Yeah, that's what I would contend, as needed until September 2020.
Until September 1st, 2020. Okay, I'll make that amendment if I can get a seconder.
Director Hain seconding, I think, seriously. So we do have now amendment on the floor, and I would ask if there's a speaker to the amendment, Director Staples and Morrison.
I do have a bit of concern from how I just heard that amendment made. So could I ask to have that repeated to me before I speak to it, to make sure that I'm speaking based on what actually has been done?
The end of number 1 says until September 1st, 2020.
So yeah, so I won't support that, simply because I feel like if it's a review at that time, that's fine. But and I guess if that's the intention, because again, we're still in the very beginnings of a pandemic and we don't know where this is going. So I don't feel that we can be that prescriptive with saying that until this date, this is our stop dead date of this happening. So if the intention is that it gets reviewed, and also we did, I believed we sort of came to some sort of consensus at the last meeting that part of the reason that we were going to wait to was for that reason, to see where things were at then, and then not for staff to be spending all that time preparing for what comes next, when we're not even sure week by week where things are going. And so I do support that commissions should have the option to meet how those commissions feel comfortable at this point in time. I'm not opposed to that at all. But I really don't believe that we should be making motions that say that, as of this date, we're going to be meeting in person or finding another way until we know what's happening.
Thank you very much. Director Morrison on the amendment.
Well, I'm struggling in our amending on the fly something that's been very thoughtful and well thought out by staff, and it's not as if there's going to be a huge resumption of activity in commissions. This is going to be as needed, where they can get quorum, where they can get input on specific matters that will be referred to them. If we're going to tell them to go and train people to do electronic meetings, but then we could put a stop to it in a month, like that's a big waste of energy on staff's part. And I think in the preamble to the report, or to the actual recommendation, it's bounded by well under the COVID-19 public health emergency. That's the framework of this whole thing. So we want to have a policy that we can make to work for a period of time under the COVID-19 emergency, And I would even suggest that we could bring this up for discussion. There's a very good possibility there's going to be an Electoral Area Services Committee meeting on the 29th, and we could put forward those other ideas that we can help to make work. I guess I'm getting off the amendment. I don't think the amendment works. We're on the fly. This is a COVID-19 specific initiative. I think we should not approve the amendment.
Thank you. Director Haim to the amendment, and then hopefully I'll call the question on the amendment.
Yeah, my interest in the amendment is to have some sort of triggering action for it to come back or be reconfirmed, depending upon the situation at the time. It's not an intention to just suddenly definitively become holding public meetings in public gatherings, but the triggering action. Without that triggering action, number one, what would cause it to flip the other way? That's not in there.
The recommendation part 2 says, in-person electronic meetings will report back to the board after CVRD enters stage 3 of the CVRD Restoration of Programs and Services Plan, which was triggered by the provincial pandemic. That's already in the base motion.
Chair Stone?
Yeah.
That was an interruption, as you mentioned to one of the other directors previously.
I thought you were done.
Okay.
Continue.
No, I am done. Thank you.
Oh, I apologize. I thought I interrupted you.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So just to reflect on that then, because I apologize if I interrupted, but it did say in part 2 that there is a trigger there when the CVRD enters stage 3 of the CVRD Restoration of Programs and Services Plan. And in that plan, does reflect on the different stages of the pandemic from the provincial guidance. But we do have a question on the amendment. If there's no further speakers on the, Director Smith.
So earlier in the community services, it says under stage 2, indoor facility bookings where physical distancing can be maintained. So us saying, let's try to do it outside, maybe because it's saying indoor facility bookings.
Can we keep it on the amendment?
Well, if we're looking for a deadline.
There's an amendment that's been moved and seconded. It gave a deadline of September 1st. That's what's on the floor.
Do we need that deadline when we can meet indoors? Because we can book facilities.
Yeah, I would put that through to staff. Not wrong in that the earlier report today said that we can book physical distancing within our facilities now.
Is that a question to me, Mr. Chair?
That's a question through to staff, so I'm not sure who wants to speak to it, but.
So, yeah, so Mr. Chair, option 2 would be for commission meetings to be held in person, and we've provided alternative locations for those meetings. And just further to your comment about entering stage 3, that would correspond with September, so staff reporting back to the board in September.
Thank you. So we do have an amendment on the floor. If the board's not happy with the amendment, you can defeat it. We'll go back to the original motion, and then there also are the alternatives that are presented in the staff report if that's a preference of the board. So I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Director Sebring and Manhas and Haim, and against? I just need everybody against the amendment to keep your hands up so that Ms. Legault can record the votes. So I believe it was all but the other 3 directors are opposed. So the amendment is defeated. So we're back to the original motion, which is the staff recommendation. Director Smith.
Yes, I saw Mr. Elzinga's hand up for a few minutes and him flash on. Maybe he could speak to the indoor facility bookings with physical distancing that was brought out in an earlier meeting.
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to Director Smith. Yes, I just wanted to confirm from the Community Services Committee that facility bookings in recreation centers are starting August 4th for the board's information. And I do agree with Ms. Cheryl's take that we're working under the CBRD Restoration of Services Plan, which has phase 2 going through to September. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to the board, under option 2, if the board prefers in-person meetings, that option is laid out. So it would be just to defeat the motion that's on the floor and then somebody to move one of the alternatives. So is there any further discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? So we've got directors Nicholson, Haim, Sebring, Smith, Wilson, Yanni DiNardo, Acton, and Manhas opposed. So I believe that motion is defeated. I'm just waiting for Ms. Legault to confirm that the motion is defeated.
So I had 8 opposed: Director Sebring, Nicholson, Haim, Smith, Wilson, Yanni DiNardo, Acton, and Manhas. Did I miss anyone?
Sorry, Director Sebring, I think we had you on the opposed list already. Okay.
Yes, so defeated.
Thank you. So I'll go to, I think I saw some hands, Director Sebring.
I'd like to move option 2 in the staff report that CBRD Commission meetings be held in person in accordance with provincial orders and WorkSafe BC requirements, and that staff report back to the board with a summary of budget implications in order to adjust operating budgets for affected divisions.
Okay, so it's been moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Is there discussion on that? And then Director Nicholson and whoever's got their microphone on with noise in the background, if you could mute it. Director Acton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have liked to have seen number 3 be chosen, because that one was kind of encompassed what we've been discussing. It allows for electronic meetings and for in-person meetings. I heard that some commissions didn't feel comfortable. This would cover them. So I guess, you know, I'll support this motion if the committee feels like it's the best case scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, I had Director, well, my screen just moved around, so I'm losing my place here. I had Director Nicholson and then Tatum.
I agree with Director Acton. I think we want to have the flexibility, depending on the commission, to have it either in person during the summertime. If we need to have a meeting, we have that option of doing it outside, or to do it electronically if that works for a particular commission. And certainly on a only as needed basis is fine by me, but there is work that needs to be done. Although at this late date, I'm not sure people are going to be very available. But I do think we need to be flexible and try and make this work for everyone.
Thank you. Dr. Tatum.
Yes, I agree with Director Nicholson, but I'm also just for a point of clarification, I'm the WorkSafe BC motion that has been made. Is that accommodating people to have outdoor meetings now?
No, so it's the motion that says CBRD Commission meetings be held in person in accordance with provincial orders and WorkSafe requirements. Is just that if it's an indoor, they'll have to follow the WorkSafe guidelines around social distancing in that facility. If it's outdoor, they would just have to follow the same kind of WorkSafe guidelines.
Okay, so that's the motion. Just follow WorkSafe guidelines, and that would enable people to meet as they feel comfortable, according to WorkSafe guidelines.
Yeah, that we would have to maintain WorkSafe guidelines. If we're hosting meetings, I think that's an obligation that we have to have. So I have Director Staples, I believe, and then Morrison.
won't be supporting this motion. I would be much more supportive of option 3 with the first option 3, number 1, and then for number 2 going back to option 1. So a combination of those two things. But I will not support this as it's on the floor.
Okay, thank you. Director Morrison.
I can't support this motion. It completely, at least in my view, from what I read in all the reports, if we have an applicant that needs to appear before an advisory planning commission or the likes, and I think we may be talking about that here, who feels uncomfortable with an in-person format. So are they, if they are immune compromised or the like, do they miss their opportunity to have to be present and to ask questions if the commission decides to meet in an in-person format and they can't attend? Like that's not a choice for them.
Yeah, point well taken. And I think that others have spoke to option 3 because it would accommodate a hybrid format. Of course, you couldn't do that outside. Like if an APC meets outside and somebody's not comfortable coming to it, then, you know, yeah, I don't know if staff want to comment on that, if that was a rhetorical question or a question for staff, but Director Morrison, was that rhetorical, more of a point to make, or did you have a question? Sorry, your microphone's muted.
I'm just opposing this motion. There was a recommendation made by staff because of all the options, none of them are great and meet all of our needs. But so I can't support this motion. Forget the question.
Any further speakers to this motion? This is the option 2 motion. Seeing no more hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? So I'll read them out again. Director Nicholson, Salmon, Toporowski, Morrison, McGonigal, Wilson, Smith, Tatum, Staples, Yanni DiNardo, Acton, and Stone opposed. The motion is defeated. Anybody want to take another crack at one of the options? Okay, well, Director Smith, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Let's all go play ball in the field, but how about we try option 3, where definitely covers everything, I think.
Okay, so it's been moved. Do we have a seconder for option 3? So that's Director Acton seconds it. So that is sorry, Director Acton, was that not a second?
That was just me exaggerating it. Pick me.
Okay. So that is that they be held in a hybrid in-person electronic format in accordance with provincial orders in either CVRD boardroom or the couch and theater. So that's the motion that is now on the floor. Discussion on this motion. Oh, I thought we were going to go straight to a vote, but we have Director Wilson. You just have to turn your microphone on, Director Wilson.
I was going to suggest, let's go straight to a vote.
Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? So Directors Morrison, McGonigal. Any others opposed? That's it, so the motion passes. Director Acton, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Would we also be able to review when perhaps during stage 4, because if our community centers are going to be able to accommodate meetings at that time, we could review it and move some of our meetings to more local spots.
I think staff's going to, according to the motion we just passed, report back to the board with cost implications and some of the logistics around this hybrid model. So I would say that maybe at that time, if staff have heard that we're kind of looking at what the horizon might look like, that we can have that discussion at that time, if that's okay, or we can.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any further discussion before we move to Director Morrison?
So can I really need to understand something here. So did we just this week vote to say that commissions are going to meet under the option 3 format? But the last time we met, that we said that we as a board, who are the actual governors of this organization, weren't going to meet into that format?
Yeah, I get your point, but that's indeed what's happened.
Okay, fair enough. Just needed to know that.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move Ms. Legault to question period.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to bring up my email here. I have a submission from Susan Kaufman. Good evening, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to the unfinished business item commission meetings during the COVID-19 public health emergency. For years now, I've been advocating for the voice of the public and have worked diligently to encourage members of the public to participate in local government matters, including the commission meetings. In the past, not all APC meetings were advertised, and minutes of the meetings were so vague the public was not privy to the discussions that led to the recommendations by the commissions. I would presume that would also extend to directors not in attendance. Mr. Chair, is it clear that the restrictions the CVRD is operating under will continue for some time yet? How will the CVRD ensure that adequate and timely information is conveyed to the public, staff, and directors?
Well, I don't know if anyone can really answer the first part of the question because it really depends on the trajectory of the pandemic. As we've seen, as places open up, we may see a surge in cases and could be taking steps back from where we are now. The second part of the question, sorry, Ms. Legault.
How will the CVRD ensure that adequate and timely information is conveyed to the public, staff, and directors?
I would say by the systems that exist that are in place. So through social media, through our agendas page on our website, through the news. I'm not sure which information that Ms. Kaufman's directly referring to, but in a broader sense, the same communication vehicles that we've used in the past and continue to use.
I haven't received any other submissions, so there's further questions in here. On the topic of APC and Parks Commissions, the Area EAPC has demonstrated that we can meet electronically for a social evening. Most of us are using different platforms in our work to keep in touch with friends and family. Is it possible that some APCs are signaling their concern that the meetings are not to be open to the public? Is it possible that the CVRD is putting up more roadblocks than necessary?
I think that's a matter of opinion. I don't believe so.
And finally, with respect to the sentiments that some of the directors have expressed tonight, the new norm is likely to involve more electronic meetings. And it is likely that we all need to adapt, or don't we all need to adapt?
Thank you. So I guess my only comment to that seems to be somewhat in contrast to what seemed to be the expressed desire was to meet in person. But Ms. Kaufman seems to be indicating comfort with meeting electronically. She said RAPC, so is she talking about the area EAPC then? Hello, Ms. Legault?
So I'm just rereading it, sorry. On the topic of APC and Parks Commissions, the area EAPC has demonstrated that we can meet electronically for a social evening.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that input, but some of those are subjective questions based on people's opinions. My opinion is I don't believe we're putting up any additional barriers. And in this case, we've just passed a motion that would lower barriers, allow them to meet in public. Any other questions?
There are no further submissions.
Thank you. And I think that we have no further business, so that'll take us to adjournment. Thank you all for your participation. Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Sebring. All those in favor? Any opposed? I doubt it.